Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast. So, kia ora, talofa lava, everyone. Welcome back to the Zeducation Podcast episode. So, today we're talking about leadership where it really matters, in our health system, in mental health and addictions especially, and in the spaces where Māori and Pasifika whānau are hurting, healing, and trying to build better futures. I'm excited to have these two powerful leaders in the room who live and breathe this work every day. First up, we've got Pulotu Master Bruce Levi, who is a service manager in Pacific Mental Health and Addictions, Integrated Care North with Health New Zealand, Counties Manukau, and Bruce has spent years walking alongside our Pasifika aiga in some of the toughest moments of their lives and leading teams who are trying to bring real change and not just tick boxes. And joining him is also Dr. Alexander Stevens II, a senior Māori academic and kaupapa Māori researcher at AUT and a mental health addictions and trauma clinician with standingtallnewzealand.org. Dr. Stephen brings both the clinical expertise and the Māori worldview into his work, making sure our people aren't just patients in the system, but actually seen, heard, and honored. So in this episode, I'm excited to talanoa about what leadership looks like on the front line of health and mental health, the realities of working with Māori and Pasifika in a system that wasn't originally built for us, the frameworks and values that guide the way that Dr. Stevens and Bruce lead in the way that they make decisions, and their honest advice for anyone who wants to serve in this space, whether you're a student, a young professional, or maybe you're already in leadership. So if you care about well-being, equity, and purpose-driven leadership, this talanoa is going to be for you. So welcome to the show, Bruce, Alex, whakawhetai tele lava, ngā mihi nui for being here. I know you're both busy serving our communities, so I really appreciate your time. But before we get into the heavy stuff, just going to ask you a real brief question here, starting with you, Bruce. If we go back right to the beginning, what inspired you? What pulled you into the health and mental health work that you do? Like, was there a moment or experience that you thought, man, this space, I'm meant to be in it? So we'll start with you, Bruce, and then we'll go over to Dr. Stevens.
Hey, whakawhetai tele lava pasitoa for your question. Very thought-provoking and makes you track back down memory lane. I have to say, and now I'm kind of in the 51 year as I look back and how life was for me as a teenager, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, and now, I would say the crux of what brought me into this space is my family. So I think there's lots of things within my family seeing role models within my family, and I have a strong faith, and I know the Lord lets me opens up my eyes to situations in my to epiphanies, I suppose, to lead me to where I am now. And so to see mental health within my family, to see addictions within my family, and to be as a young child, responding to that, thinking, is it living in Otara, this is normal. We used to laugh at that sort of stuff, and then realizing actually no, those were coping mechanisms or the dark times as a child of migrant parents, coming from Samoa to as the kind of cliched narrative where our parents did what they could. They parented as much as they could and did what they needed to do in regards to getting us a house. We came from Kainga Order, or back in those days it was State House and in Otara, and then Mum saw what she saw. I'm beating around the bush in regards to your question, but just kind of leading towards what you're saying. Saw the light in regards to what you put the affordable homes in Manukau in Hyperion. So my mum was like, we're moving out of Kansas, moving out of Texas, and oil, black gold, Texas tea. We were singing jazz and million. So I was just thinking about the movies and programs that used to come up while we were growing up. But the idea of opportunity, I suppose, moving out of Otara to Manukau, not quite black gold or Texas tea, but of some sort from my mum, or was probably coming out of a space where that we into something new and our own idea of having our own home. So I think for the well-being of my family and seeing from dark to light, kind of naturally alignment into the space of mental health, that other families can also experience a light to their darkness. I suppose that there is a brighter tomorrow, and aligned with our values in regards to serving people and letting them know, hey, we got through, so can you, and yep, you're going through a similar journey, the clashing of two worlds, coming from overseas into a space where your parents do all they can do to provide you opportunity, safety, and security. And it happened to us, and it can happen to you. Yep. Now, Kainga Ora has a stigma on all families, ensuring that, like us, also get a second chance in this community, in this world, in this life, and not to be tainted with the brush that sometimes gets high media profile for those with high social challenges. So being amongst it all, to be there, as you said earlier in the introduction, to help lead families out of tough times, that was probably my driver. Aligned with our values, being the middle child, or I was a second child, I wasn't the eldest, but to look after our young ones, I think for me that was, you have your own spaces where you look after others. It's extending that aroha, that alofa to others who also need that, and also watching them flourish by the grace of God and realizing their gifts and their strengths. And so this life of, I started as an addictions worker. I was youth working myself and my wife. We were looking after the youth at church, and my studies at that time as a psychology graduate aligned with kind of what's needed to get into the field. And then over time, it was professionalized, and we needed to do the bridging papers to get into what we now call it the Drug and Alcohol Practitioner Association, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So 98 started into that space, just up the road here. I'm in Otahu. Paidas was the name of the service. And then now, 27 years later, still, hand on heart, I feel like I'm enjoying the work that we're doing. It's hard, but, as we say, South Auckland is the New York of mental health. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. You're the beautiful trenches of our taonga, and we talk about to our medical students, any kind of type of disease or disorder or whatever you call it, challenge, you'll see it here. And you have the privilege of working with those kind of presentations and enjoy the strengths of our cultures, our beautiful community around here, our whaiora, tangata whaiora, that's the name you offer to those who are service users of our service, literally walking outside here. and what a privilege it is to be able to work, play, and worship and the spaces that you live. It's not always the case, but that's the case here. So thank you, Pasi. I thank the Lord for where I'm at now, and I look forward to whatever the next decade looks like. In the 50s, you then look forward to what's the next one? 65, retirement.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, that's how we got here.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I could just hearing you in the tone, you're very passionate about this. And I love that your upbringing, your family really inspired you to get into this space. And, it's really close to home for you, eh? And you saw those examples and things happening around you. I'm like, man, I want to make a difference, which is pretty cool. My connection to the two things you mentioned there in your story, I know it was just a cheeky thing, but I lived in Texas for a couple of years serving there. So actually was in Texas. And then the second thing, my parents, for some reason, I don't know, maybe it was a thing back then, they also felt inspired, but it was in Onehanga. So they moved from Onehanga to Manirewa and bought their own home. So I grew up in Rewa. So that's our little connection there. But look, thank you for the work that you do, my brother, and thank you for sharing that story. Over to you, Dr. Stevens. What inspired you? What pulled you into this space?
So malo lava, malo lele, kia ora koutou katoa, tue. Good to be in such fine company. So look, let me tell you a story. And as you know this, Pasi, 16 years old, got my first sexual abuse disclosure, had no idea what to do. A year later, he committed suicide. So, you know, that kind of shaped my own thinking about how do we support people with complex issues, even at that age. Did some work with Rainbow Youth around our takatapoi, whawhawhine, whakaleti, maha, you know, all our whānau. And again, you know, mental health and addictions was just part and parcel. I don't like the word vulnerable. I think it's overused, but I'll use it in this context with our vulnerable communities that, hey, you know, that were being kicked out by their aiga, their whānau, just for being outside of a colonial norm. Right, so not because our traditional values and colonial norms are different, and you know, I'm not as seasoned as Bruce's 27 years. I've got 22 years, so you know, I give that to our brother, in terms of working mental health and addiction. So you know, I'd say close to more 4,500 guys, I think. From working in prisons, which I'm still doing now, you know, our homeless community, all the way through the country. So from the top of Kaitaia, Hokianga up north, down to Wellington, through to Taranaki, over to Gisborne, and then in Taupo. That's where you'll see me kind of doing my work outside of AUT. Working in probably my own marketing guy. He keeps telling me to promote this idea of hidden silence. You know, all these areas that we just don't want to talk about as a society. Part of my thinking, and since I'm going to bring you two together, I mean, you, Pasi, for example, went to James Cook, I think. So your school motto was Endeavour, and Bruce, from memory, you went to Manirewa, right? So you were Aim High. Yes. So I'm not going to get in between which school was better. But, you know, for me, one of the things I think about with both your school mottos is that you have to endeavour in this space, not only to support our community, but what's it like being Māori and or Pacific? And actually what we know is that in the drug and alcohol field, our young Māori and Pacific don't tend to stay in the sector for very long. So as I've gotten older, my role now has been very much how do we support our young ones to stay in the sector? So, you know, we've all got life experience, but how do we get you to stay in the sector? How do we get you to kind of endeavour on? But then also, how do we get you to aim high so that you can achieve the things that you want to do and kind of do all the work that Bruce has been certainly doing in his senior roles, and what I've been able to do and use these spaces, these wā, or te wā, if I got my Tongan right, to help create moments where our Māori and Pacific people can thrive.
Beautiful, beautiful. Again, you know, similar to Bruce there, just your story, your passion, you know, and that's a really heavy space, you know, and to turn that into something where you want to give back and to serve your people, like that's very, very inspiring. You know, so thank you both. You know, like again, we've got Dr. Stevens here, you know, Māori and the way that he approaches his work, you know, he's a leader in his space, especially looking after both Pasifika and Māori. And then we've got Bruce here, you know, Pasifika leader in the healthcare space. So we've got two amazing leaders here, Māori and Pasifika, doing amazing stuff for our people. So I like what you mentioned around Dr. Stevens around how do we get more and inspire more Pasifika Māori to get into the space, but also how do we help them stay in the space as well, right? I would love to see more Māori and Pasifika like yourselves in healthcare, right? So my next question for both of you, because I think part of it is also being real about you know, around what the space looks like as well, and not just sugarcoating it, right? And you've been in here for 20 plus years, both of you, 22 years, 27 years, right? So when people think of leadership, you know, when people hear leadership in health, they often think like policies or big titles, right? But for you, what does leadership actually look like day to day on the ground, especially in the work that you do? Yeah? What does leadership look like in that space? So we'll start with you, Bruce, and then we'll go over to Dr. Stevens.
Good question, Pasitawa. I think, you know, when I think about that question, and I think about kind of the work we do, the gains, and we talk about improving. And I like what Dr. Alexandra said. Part of this work is trying to improve outcomes, say for our Pasifika and Māori, and also for our other groups, right, like our increased Asian population that we have. Southeast Asian, you know, just down the road here, Papatoa has the highest Hindi Hindi population or most in New Zealand, and you can see the influences around those spaces. So for me, it's leadership. A couple of things. Leadership is turning up when you don't want to do it, and as you get older, there's some things that feel like it's kind of repeating itself, and why isn't this moving the dial in regards to outcomes? Why are we still seeing the same issues around? We've got good access rates within mental health and addictions, and that's typically for Māori and Pacific. Usually in some spaces where we don't have good access, we'd be trying to put things in place there to try and increase that. But and here in mental health addictions, where probably it's overrepresented when you compare it to the population within our community that we serve, in the communities that we serve. But tuning up, because largely my role has now become bringing the best out of my team managers, but also attending to compliance and payroll, and ensuring we've got the right numbers and the vacancy list. And that's not my most enjoyable part of my role. But, we talk about, the things that aren't your jam. You have to make it your jam because that's also part of your work. As you can't select, you'll say, I'll do a little bit of this because it'll bite you later on, So there's a little bit of that why tuning up is really important, and it could be jumping on the early Zoom call, or jumping on the early, especially for these handovers. So my role is largely operational, as non-clinical. However, there's a lot of clinical matters that I need to be aware of, and so I look at the meeting and think, oh yeah, they've got the doctor in there, we've got the nurse in there. I don't need to be in there. But then I think there's a presence of the manager to ensure that we're all on the same page, and that we all agreed that this is what we're going to do for this family. Come to, and usually when we get to that point where it's got a bit urgent because we've tried everything else, and now they've escalated it to myself. Then I know there's a level of urgency before I escalate further to a general manager and clinical head. So tuning up is one thing, and secondly is leadership is influence. So tuning up, and so for example, I remark back to what you said, Dr. Alexandra, aim high. So if you look at when I was GM for Pacific Health and Te Tukutumai, we were doing the values work, and aim high got in there because part I was thinking, oh yeah, that's something I resonate with, and because we were chucking it into the table, onto the floor as contributions for values. And now that if you look at it, it's now still sitting there. Aim high. Angamoa is the Māori term that associated with aim high. But I laugh around just being there, and I guess leaving kind of those things. For me, it's not a big deal, but it is obviously if you talk to my, that is a value, and as a leave behind, I'm not there anymore in the counties now. So I kind of laugh at that, but I think actually those little things occur if you're there, and if you're not there, then you don't get that opportunity to be able to impress or impart the values. And I think for me, as you said, Pasito, what is leadership? It is, for me, it's living on your values, living out your values, and that's my compass. If I feel a little bit okay around decision making, I will always tend to go back to, not always, I think in this field sometimes it's it can be misconstrued as a weakness, that you're not being a little bit more direct or pushing people. You should direct them to that space. We need cover there. We need doctors there. Get your doctor. And say, well, you can't do that. They'll just go to the union, and we, as you know, we've had lots of strikes lately, and part of it is also we want to improve work conditions, but it's also how we engage with our workforce. For me, they're the key enablers really. We want better outcomes. So influence and living up your values. So That's in a nutshell. Thank you, Pastor.
That's awesome. I love that. And just for our audience, Bruce just finished saying that leadership is about obviously staying true to your values, living up your values, but also showing up. Leadership is showing up, and leadership is influence. And he talked about all those parts that, sometimes part of leadership is doing those things like compliance, admin, payroll, all of that stuff. But just as equally important, they're all important and they're all part of leadership. Right. So, Dr. Stevens, over to you, my friend. Same question.
Wow, where do you go after that inspiring kōrero? I agree. I think leadership is about turning up. And if I look at my own particular roles that I've had, in both community and government and the education sector, for me, leadership is about rocking up, but it's also about, from a Māori lens, it's also about how do we do things that enhance equity with the Indigenous people of this country? How do we ensure that when we're working with others, that they get the work that we do, but also we have to take them on a little bit of a journey. I think for me, it's about building realistic relationships, but I also know that any good leader, from my perspective, recognizes that it takes a lot of energy. In a sense, and all three of us do this, we code switch all the time between a Palangi or a Pākehā or a Taui we would view, and then we go back into our own culture, and somehow we because we're expected to do this, right? If you think of I'm going to say colonization again, and it's about how do we, as a minority, even the Pacific Ocean is where we whakapapa to, right? How do we support this majority of people that kind of look at us and go, we don't know what to do, and perhaps you can help us work with our Maoris or our Pacific people. And so for me, what I've learned, and if I could add my little bit, is that sometimes leadership is also about not making friends and about breaking new roads that haven't been forged before. It's about doing things that aren't going to win you points right off. But for you, well, for me, I'm all about the seventh generation approach, right? So I'm like, how can we support, say, for example, you two coming forward, me, and then all those others, so that 7 generations from now, hopefully your great-great-great-grandchildren won't even have to think about the same challenges that, there was a report that came out not so long ago that racism was one of the biggest reasons why our whānau, irrespective of ethnicity, didn't go into hospitals. That Middlemore Hospital had a 50% chance that you might not come up alive, because often our whānaus have long-term illnesses and don't access unless it's life and death, and then by then it's probably more death than life. So what would it be like? So part of me as a leader is, how do I think ahead? And I think, well, what would it be like for our whānau just to go in? They don't have to think that I'm going to be judged. They don't think I'm going to be treated differently. They just go, look, I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling distressed. I'm thinking all these thoughts, but I'm not, I want help, and they can just go without having to worry. So part of that vision, I guess, is about how do we make this happen? One of the things that I've spoken to both of you about is the importance of mentorship. So I think any good leader should have a backup plan. One of my own friends, and both of yours too, was Efesol, God bless him, and his leadership style was very different to our own, but he was always about being personable and getting and seeing, the vision for people. Tash Kemp, who also recently passed away, another politician, great wahine Māori over in Manurewa Marae, I used to work with her too. Again, she was always about working, weaving relationships. And so for me, I think about these leaders that have now gone, and I think about legacy. So what is it that I want to be remembered? I don't want to be on a giant building across the road from Levi. I think by all means, keep that. But, one of the things that Sione, my own mentee, reminds me is like, well, how do you want to be remembered? And genuinely, I want to be remembered as someone who wasn't just a nice guy, but someone who actually forged paths that were hard but necessary. If we're going to reduce that 13% of, very high psychological distress within our Māori and Pacific, we need to be brave and, guide the next generation forward. And that's where I think, leadership becomes vital in the work that we do.
Beautiful. I love that. And again, that's that's awesome perspective for our audience around leadership is forging new paths. And sometimes it's about taking that brave step forward and getting into spaces that we're normally underrepresented, getting into rooms, conversations, surrounding ourselves with people that normally we can't find other Pacifica and Māori in, but we need to have a voice in there to influence change. And so it does take a lot of courage and to get out of our comfort zone. And I think coming back to Dr. Stevens saying, yes, it's about your friends, but it's more so around the perspective of get out of your comfort zone. Don't stay stuck there. Like, yeah, I'm okay here. I'm always safe here. You always got your friends, but forging new paths, getting into new spaces because our people need you there. I love it. And I also love what you mentioned around racism, like we're going to talk about cultural safety later, because I'm going to ask you, like, how from a Māori and Pacifica, how do we help people who are walking through the door, like where does cultural safety start? What does it look like? So I want to get into that. And then you also mentioned, Dr. Stevens, around frameworks, okay, like Western versus Pacifica and Māori. So I'm keen to hear how both of you, being in the space, Pacifica and Māori leaders, how do you navigate that world, and how do you bring your values and your culture into the work that you do? But before we move into frameworks and all of that good stuff, I got one more question around leadership, okay? Just being realistic. Just, we talked about what does leadership look like day to day, but tell us the reality. Don't hold back. Like, what are some of the hardest moments of leadership? Dr. Stevens, you mentioned earlier one of your first disclosures, and unfortunately sad, that person committed suicide. Like how do you carry that? How do you move forward from that? So we'll start again with Bruce. Like, what's the hardest leadership moments that you've had, and how have you been able to move forward from that? So just being real with our audience here. So start with you, Bruce, and then Dr. Stevens.
As we try and do our best with the services that we deliver here, but sometimes we get it wrong. And so I think probably the most challenging for me is being sitting on the phone with a distraught parent about the lack of quality of services that we had offered for them and their family, and just kind of letting them just vent, and to let them, and try not to take it that personally when they go, do you know how to do your job? I think this is beyond you, and of course you have to be in their shoes as parents. They want the best for their kids, so they're going to try and they're going to hustle to the point where they'll try and make you feel, I suppose, inferior or make you move, and this rectify the situation, which we do, but there's that element there, and because in this end up having to sign away the response to their letter or their complaint. And so I kind of feel that my name's mud all around the community. People got these apology letters signed from me. And so I think for myself, it's learning to not take that personally. But there is, when you're in these roles, there's a huge responsibility. There's a burden, and it's how much you deal with that burden, that it doesn't eat away at you. And I can imagine that eat away at the people. That's why people don't really last. That's why you don't last long in these roles. There's a point where only so much you can handle being responsible. The accountability of being in these roles is quite high, and so we're dealing with lives, and so having to constantly apologize for our shortcomings. It's a big one, and I think as you my usual kind of disposition is being optimistic and being hopeful, and then the side of leadership is actually, as you're saying, you still have to turn up to get the bad news and just take it in. So I think that's the reality in some of these roles, which I think people already know. That's why you're covering these roles with trembling, fear and trembling, because it's of the burden of responsibility and accountability, and essentially everything that you sign off. There's a huge kind of having to explain yourself and why, and so always having to defend yourself in these roles, and I guess for you, your question was the reality. So it's ensuring that you have a good group around you. You surround yourself with good people, and And I think having put in place like supervision and mentorship, as Dr. Alexander talked about. And I do want to make a remark on Dr. Alex's reference to Efeso, that picture of him and that symbolism of Efeso on the wall of the car park in Manukau. And, the thing that warms me up about that, it was right in front of that, with the organisation where I used to work at the Pulse Collective. Efeso and myself were literally looking at that car park when we'll be having a good mock about as part of supervision, as you have a mock about other people and a mock about yourself. And then to actually see him on that, it warms me up, because even though he's now with the Lord, there's a whole collective like him. I think I see you, Bussy, I see you, Dr. Alex. I see that Harriet Toilet Fours, because he was kind of, I remember his eulogy. I see a lot of people carrying that mantra that wherever you go, be values driven. So it's good, Alex, that you referenced him, because he's something that we can aspire to, but also he'll be here laughing away and acknowledging us as well. So that's the harsh reality of leadership before I re-traumatize myself. But that's the part of it, and having capacity in your heart to do good, as well as the taking the harsh realities of parents who are distraught and want the best for their children. Yeah, but that's it. That's one of the realities of the meaning. Thank you, Bussy. Good question.
Thank you, Bruce, and Dr. Stevens, for yourself, my friend.
Listen, our brother Scribe in 2003 released the album The Crusader, and his famous lyrics, which is sometimes how I respond, like, when I'm down and out, I'm struggling, I'm wondering how I'm going to make it through. Then you have to put on your best professional suit, your voice, and you go in there and you just have to bat it out of the park, And Bruce spoke about the house system. Let me jump to the court system. So part of what I do in my clinical role is I help both our Māori and Pacific who have been charged with different things, and they want to reconnect with their kids. So it's often with the family courts, right? So part of my job is to write a clinical report which includes their history, mental health, drug and alcohol. You've got to be transparent, right? So when you hear, this is the realities of leadership, when you hear, all the things that people go through, and you think statistically, as I do as a research, you think, wow, you were never going to have, it was almost like it was predestined for them to go down this line. So part of what I have to do as a leader is acknowledge that the spaces, and I agree with you, Bruce, it's really hard. Really, I think people like the idea that, of being a leader, but once you know the responsibility and the heaviness that it comes with, like having to explain to him, look, you want to see your kids now, this is probably going to be a 5-year journey. Your son, who's 7, is probably going to be 12 by the time you realistically have some kind of contact. That doesn't also include, so, like we actually both, just for context, we both worked in gambling helpline and lifeline. So leadership for me is also about how do you have conversations behind the doors, because sometimes having official channel conversations are just going to be hard. Actually, I've spoken about this before, Pussy, and I'm sorry for the plane flying over. If you can't get around the front of the marae, go find your auntie with a tea towel and go around the back, and that's what we have to do. Sometimes those backdoor conversations sometimes are the best way to go. And I spoke about Efeso before, but I'd known him since I was 8, and so I'd seen him grow up, and he was so eloquent with his words. And I fail in this particular regard. I'm very straightforward, but it's always about building relationships. And sometimes, brother, when you've got someone that's in need, you don't want to build relationships because you want to help them now, but you've got to constantly set the standard. And the reality is, for me anyway, it's hard work. You two are great examples. So yes, you have your own senior positions, but you're also dads, your husband. So then you've got to think about leadership goes into those roles too. And for me, as I mentioned before, I've got a mentee. His name's Sione. He's officially my papi, which is, he called it his puppy, personal assistant Pacific Islander. And so like he'll ring me once a week and he'll be like, where in the country are you going to be? And I'll tell him, I'm going to be in Whangarei on Monday, I'm going to be in Hamilton on Friday. And then he'll ring me the next day. He's like, okay, so you should be in Whangarei. I'm like, oh no, I'm in Taupo. And he's like, what the hell are you doing in Taupo? You're not supposed to be there for 3 weeks. And I'm like, I'm sorry, got a phone call from this iwi. We need to go down and we need to do this work. And you just see him get so hoha, and he tells me all the time, I want to learn from you, but what's the point if you're on your way to burnout? So part of this leadership stuff is, are you saying what you are doing? And sometimes I don't. I'm terrible at looking after myself. If I'm going to be absolutely honest. I mean, after this, I was going to convince myself to go for a walk. But sometimes, I get tired. I don't come home normally till maybe one in the morning. If I'm working at AUT, then I'll do my work afterwards. I might not go to bed to say maybe 2, get up at 6:30, and then like a good washing machine, rinse and repeat. So I also quickly acknowledge that, leaders in our sectors, if they don't burn out, they die early. So I've looked at people like Moana Jackson, who's a famous Māori academic. I don't want to end up down that path. I'd like to retire, God willing, I make it to 65. I crawl to that age. And I'd love to be able to, and I've said this to Sione, my other mentee, Ira, I'd love to be able to shake hands and go, Hatch, I'm out. I'm going to find a little cottage. I'm going to put up my electric fence. Do not come and contact me. I've done my bit. So, yes, there's some awesome stuff with leadership, but it's hard, especially when you're holding different spaces, which is why, personally, I respect both of you, because, there's multiple layers when we talk about leadership. There's multiple layers and different functions and roles that we have.
Wow, powerful. Thank you both for being real and for being raw around the reality and some of the challenges. And leadership, just in general, across any industry, across the whole board, is never easy. But in healthcare, you're not just dealing with people, you're dealing with patients. And I can imagine the heaviness and the pressure that you must feel, but yet both of you still keep going. Like that, we're just grateful that no matter how hard it is, you keep going. But, you mentioned, on your way to burnout. And sometimes, yes, we've got to have people on the side to kind of remind us, even if you're a leader, remind us, hey, slow down a little bit, because we want to take a break before we break. You know what I mean? And taking breaks intentionally is still being productive, especially when it's intentional as well. So this is my last question in this space before we move on, because you've brought it up, is look, this is the reality. I don't want to scare our Pasifika and Māori. Like, this is still an amazing space. Yes, we're talking about a matter of life and death, and especially when we're talking about healthcare, but it's still something that's very meaningful. We'd love to see more of our Pasifika and Māori here. Like, what's your advice around looking after your wairua, your well-being in the space? We know it's hard. There's a lot of pressure, but maybe two key things, and if we can keep this part here just real brief, just 2 key things, advice around looking after your well-being in this space, even when it gets hard as a leader. Bruce?
Well, Bussy, I just see your videos of you squatting 200 kgs at the gym, and I think that's one aspect, is the physical. And for me, there's a place just down the road here at F45 where you don't have to think. You go there, you're already kind of sapped mentally, and you just follow. And then by the end, the juices are flowing. You've got a second wind, or sometimes you're even more tired. But I think that helps kind of deal with some of the internal talk, and but supervision and ensuring talking with other people, that helps. And for me, I suppose, as I've talked about, my faith is probably a big deal. So I'm constantly talking, constantly thinking, constantly meditating, and constantly, Lord, help me through this. It might come through before I go to a meeting, or when I feel the butterflies or anxiety, help me, Lord. Those are the kind of basic things in our family. Our families are really key. So I know you see too, but in a nutshell, those are the things you have to have in place if I was to give you advice. And Alexandra has given me some great supervision as in the past, and that's probably where our connections are still. Thank you, Brother Alex, for being able to support me down kind of previous decade, a decade ago, And so having good people along the journey to help your well-being is awesome. It's a blessing. Malo.
My lord, beautiful. You just pretty much described the whānau whare model there in the whare tapa whā, social well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, spiritual. It's funny you mentioned the gym, eh? But actually, there's some truth to it, eh? Just like your physiology,
Hallelujah.
Your physiology influences your psychology. Is what they say. So definitely. So thank you for sharing that, Bruce. Dr. Stevens.
I was going to say Bruce should know that whānau whare model. I think it was his uncle that was the one that created it, so he should know it inside and out. I'd be disappointed if it was my nephew that didn't know it inside and out. But anyway, go on. You want to say something?
I'm flamboyant like my uncle. Or my uncle.
Yeah, you'd love it.
Look, if I had two brief things, here's the first thing: is that one, I try to have a broad selection of people that I'm friends. And I try not to have friends that work in the same job as me, because all you'll ever talk about is work. The second thing I think, as you've seen this podcast, is that music really is my life and soul. Whether it's the 80s, the 90s, all the way through, music is the best way for me to process, because when I come home, I don't want to come home and I'm in a mood. I don't want to come home because I'm angry or sad. Like my family deserve the best of me. And so music is the way forward. And just recently, as an example, I was talking to a client that was really bad, and I sung to him, take my hand, we're halfway there. And then we both started singing Living on a Prayer. And then in that moment, you kind of just had this, we were both, understood the journey ahead. So anyway, those are my two things for well-being. Don't have friends that all work in the same sector, otherwise you'll talk shop. And music, for me anyway, is how I release a lot of my own stuff. Especially so my plan is, whether I'm driving home from AUT or from another job, by the time I get home, I should be in a state of noa. I should be in a state where I'm feeling balanced, because it's my family. It's not my family's responsibility to hold what I'm feeling.
I love that. Thank you so much. So some great advice there from Bruce and Dr. Stevens, just around, leadership is hard, but, don't drop the ball or looking after your health, your well-being. Yes, part of our responsibility is caring for others, but it starts with caring about yourself first, okay? You can't help others if you're mentally, physically, emotionally not all there. Make sure you look after those aspects of your well-being so that you could better serve and better support those in your stewardship, in your care. All right, so look, I'll be robbing and disappointing my audience if I don't get into the space around, culture. We've got to talk about culture. We've got Pacific and Māori leaders here in healthcare. Okay, so for both of you, again, we'll start with Bruce as well. Just when it comes to your leadership and your clinical work, tell us about some of the frameworks or models that you use when you approach your work. Yes, we name drop the whānau whare model, the whare tapa whā model. If those are the frameworks that you use, give us examples of how you use that in your work as well. So again, coming back to my question is, when it comes to your leadership, your clinical work, how do you incorporate or integrate some of these cultural frameworks in your work, and what are some examples? So Bruce?
It's good. It's good. We can start talking to this point here. Thank you, Bossy. So I think so I hold a lot of meetings and hold a lot of spaces to ensure we have good communication. So communication is key in leadership, and it's hard to communicate if you don't get a chance to sit with your team. So the talanoa process, and I just want to break it down, it's it's not just a talk. There is friction required, and and I'll connect that to the framing of the portfolio le fala, and that's something that's become a lot more. Sorry, Dr. Alessandro, you're going to probably speak to this, but you can add to it, where you literally, hey, let's start talk, let's talk. There's some stuff that needs to be dealt with. Let's just put it out onto the mat, onto the fala. And so that requires people to be open and frank, and there's tears and a little bit of anger, but as a leader, you've got to be able to hold that space good, so that it doesn't become a psychologically unsafe space for people, which unfortunately can lead into those processes. So there's a bit of it's good to have friction, but it's also sometimes you've got to know your leadership, and it doesn't always work out. Sometimes I don't know, and and find out where there's a bit work follow-up required after those formals. So, but it's helped us get to talanoa, the process, and also allowing people to speak frankly and to fulfill the whala has helped really get to the crux of the issue. What is this issue behind it? And most of the time it comes down to fear and ego, or, people wanting to be heard. And so we have different positions of how to clinically look after someone. As you know, we have multidisciplinary teams here. We have psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, occupational therapists, and how do you ensure their voice are all equal? Unfortunately, health hierarchy is the doctor is the kind of the highest point of accountability, because everything, the buck stops there. However, the contribution from the other disciplines is just as important. And so what you do find within medical, real quickly, there's lots of kind of understanding between nurses and doctors, but the allied health spaces, they also feel, hey, we're just as important, and even more important, particularly in spaces like South Auckland, where the issues, parts of South Auckland aren't necessarily medical, but social issues, ensuring we've got access to things to support families. So you might live in other spaces like, and I'm stereotyping here, but in Tucken and Botany, they might have supports already, so they might want more therapies, talking therapies. Whereas here in Otahu, therapies is not even in the question; they just need a house to live in. So it's been able to hold space safely for important talanoa, so that everyone gets on the same page. So that framework of talanoa, knowing that you can't avoid the tough stuff, you can't avoid the tears sometimes to get to the point, but at the same time, being able to follow up and to really make it safe for everyone, and checking in individually post that formal. As you know, the group processes, there's people in there that may be affected, so you've got to do the follow up thereafter. So there's I guess when you talk about culture, big C, but also small C, the pastoral support for those who might have been affected by that talanoa. And sometimes it won't be perfect. You might get 90% of the people on board, and they'll be the one. And that's the life of a leader. It's not 100%, but yeah, those things have happened too. So.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love that framework, and just talanoa, so simple but so powerful. The concept of talanoa, and I feel like there's a relationship between talanoa and whakawhanaungatanga. It starts with connection. It starts with relationship, and just creating a safe space where we can share, not sweep things under the whala, but put things out on the whala, put everything out on the table, put it all out there, even if it hurts. The truth, everything, right? This is a safe space, because once we have those real conversations, and once we understand the real problems, then we can start talking about real solutions, and have real conversations. So moving it in there, and I love that concept of just talanoa, safe space for kōrero, Beautiful. And Dr. Stevens, you, my friend, in terms of your cultural approach and the frameworks that you use in your mahi?
Yeah. So can I just do a quick follow-up? I think that vulnerability is important, so long as we all know that vulnerability shouldn't be taken advantage of. So, I'm all happy to have open dialogue. I call it a nutchuck, but if you're going to try to weaponize it against me, then we're going to close this conversation down. So I think vulnerability, right? Any leader should be able to acknowledge their own limits, but also acknowledge that, hey, acknowledging vulnerability, acknowledging limits isn't an opportunity to take a pot shot at me either. In terms of frameworks, as you know, I think Te Whare Tapawhā with love is old, outdated, 30 years too old. And I've developed my own framework. Sorry. For Te Ao Marama. So I use that, but then I also use our whakatauki. I sometimes use verses as a way of guiding leadership. So I've had conversations where people are feeling really overwhelmed, they don't know what to do, and they might be Christian, and I might say, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one despite the other, and they get it. So I'm like, which one are you serving? You've got all this, it feels like you're diverting your energy out. So which one are you wanting to serve? Because it sounds like you're doing multiple, and that's not possible. The other one is, if people give me lots of excuses and I just have that BS detector, I just know that something's off, I gently remind people that a good tree cannot bear bad fruit and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So which tree do you think you are right now? And I say to people, you don't have to answer right now because the evidence is there, but I need you to step back and actually have a think about, how are your actions, if you're thinking about feeding, especially in the health system, like I said, our whānau want to have a good experience, and if they get a bad experience, especially in this digital age, they'll Facebook it, Instagram it. Heaven forbid that you end up on a video bus. See, when I was, very quick story, when I was lecturing at MIT, I said, look, as Māori and Pacific, you have to protect yourself 3 times over. You have to protect yourself because of your culture, because anytime it goes on the news, they always go for that Māori Pasifika, Pacific social worker, Māori social worker. It's never just a social worker. It's always weaponized against our ethnicity. So you've got to protect your profession. You've got to protect your ethnicity. And then you've also got to remember that, as leaders, which is hard, is that you've got your own families as well. And, everyone's prepared to have your back. And sometimes when the brown stuff hits the fan, they kind of disappear. So, and then your family's holding this stuff. And it's hard. I was thinking of a few people, in the South Auckland area that have these leadership roles, and they've got a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant, and now they're in the media for this other stuff. And I'm like, this is the thing with leadership, is that it's not about anointing yourself as the chosen one. It's that you are put there often by people in the community, and I've never forgotten what my contribution is. And at some point, I'm going to trick my mentees to stand in this space, and then I plan to get in my car and drive as fast away as I can and let them take over. So those are my kind of frameworks. I use verses, I use whakataukis often, especially in those meetings, like Bruce was saying, with our whānau, it can be a bit hard. It can help guide the process, to hopefully have like the same vision. And to be fair, with those ones that I did say, whether they were a good tree or bad tree, some have come back and said, I'm a bad tree, what do I do? I'm like, right, we need to chop you at the trunk and try again, so that's how I do it anyway.
Yeah, I love that. And it's true. And people can sniff it a mile away. If they know that you're just in that role for yourself and for your own gain, people can just tell. Leadership is about service. It's about others, helping others. So I love that, Dr. Stevens. Now, look, we're drawing towards the end of the podcast here. It's been a really, really great conversation, hearing from both a Māori and Pacific leader in healthcare, mental health, addiction, just doing amazing thing in the space. It's not easy, as you guys said, but it's necessary. It's important. We need people like you, role models like you in this space for our people. So thank you for the work that you do. I just want to, as we're talking to our young Māori Pasifika, just any young generation, okay, who wants to work in health, mental health, or in this space here, they might feel a little bit intimidated about the system. There's a lot, social media these days. There's a lot of stuff you're scrolling, the healthcare, the system, it's against us. It's just, there's all this narrative and stuff around it, right? What would you say to a Pasifika and Māori who might feel a little bit intimidated by the system, but want to make a difference and get into this space? What can you say to them? We'll start with you, Bruce.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've pondered on that myself, going back to how I got here. I think for me, apart from that, I think the Lord lays people in your life. There's people along there that kind of show you what it could be like. So there's mentors, and Alexandra talked about it. And those mentors are the ones that can give you an insight. They just warm up that door. And if you're ambivalent, and I was ambivalent one time coming into the field, particularly from an NGO and then into what was DHB, but now Te Whatu Ora, the machine of health. And I was thinking, as a 20-year-old Samoan male, feeling a little bit like anxious and all this might be easier just to stay where I am. And he said to me, Bruce, if you're going to come into mental health, you got to have fun. and for me, I locked in because I think no one told me. And what he was basically saying is the well-being comes first. First to hear from the leader, number one, the well-being first. Yep, we're there to serve, but just remember, as you said, Basi, So yeah, what he said was fun, and so that aligned with me really quickly, and that kind of took away any sort of I guess fear of coming into the field and coming 200%, because if that leader that I've referenced in my studies has just told me and given me permission to be who I am, and for me as a leader, they talk about being precise, the whole being's powerful, playful, and peaceful. I'm probably not powerful, but more playful and peaceful. And so that totally goes against what we've seen, maybe, the powerful role, which is really important. And you hear people before they come through. And I thought, oh, cool, I can fit in. I can come here into the space. There is a space for me, particularly in the machine of Te Whatu Ora and the DHB, and you see in politics that you have to bang the table, and that's how you do leadership, which I think there's a role in that, but there's also a role in other diverse ways of influence. So that for me, for advice, the fact that you're compelled and this could be a field, that's already tick. You need to house for you, and then just talking to the people that are already in there like this, who allow you to be who you are, the gifts that are already in you, that God's giving you, because it's going to impact the service in some way that we need for that time and space. Yeah, so I look forward to it.
Dr. Stevens.
What was the question again, Pasito? What was the...
Yeah. So the question is, talking to our young Pasifika and Māori, or the next generation, who might feel a little bit intimidated about the system. I was lost in Bruce's thing as well. I got so absorbed in it. Where are we? I just finished. So what's your advice?
Sure. Yeah. Can I just quickly do another curtail back and say I can actually absolutely agree with Bruce. I've never seen him raise his voice. I've never seen him hit the table. He is very alofa driven. To be clear, I'm not alofa driven. I wish I was. I wish I had the biggest heart that he has, but I have heart failure, so it's not as big as what our bros has. So, but he's very, very alofa driven. He's highly respected. People love him. So people tend to run from me because they just know that the brow stuff's going to hit the fan. So here's my suggestion for our young ones: run, flee, escape. And when you're ready, come back, because actually the reality is we need more Māori and Pacific in the field, but it's not meant for everyone. People that work in mental health and addictions often have some kind of special connection to either because of their own stuff, or they might know a family member. But that in itself isn't just a reason to get it. You've got to understand that as Māori and Pacific, and whether you like it or not, we have multiple responsibilities to coming into this space. When Bruce was talking earlier on about, like having, say more Pacific, on site, I was thinking, like, I call that the chocolate chip cookie effect. When you go to a conference, I'm always looking for the brown people to kind of work towards, because there's a thing about safety, right? And sometimes you might be the only representation. I can think of one of my mates, his name's Tangi Poko. He's the only occupational therapist that I know that's Cook Island, and that's it. So he has to hold this space, not only as an occupational therapist, but as someone who's also PI. And then also have all these other expectations. So for young ones, I'm like, hey, before you decide to get into any kind of study, have a look and see what scholarships are available. Don't get yourself into thousands of dollars of debt and turn around next semester and go, oops, I don't think that this is for me, But also recognize that the sector is open. Can I also say to you, Pasi, which sounds terrible, but I do a lot of references. Our Australian counterparts love our Māori and Pacific. They have a natural instinct to cultural diversity, and often job recruitment agencies who I'd given reference for might occasionally ring me and go, hey, do you know any more? Because we want them over here. I'm like, no, I prefer that they stayed in this country. So there is a demand. But you just kind of understand, what is it that you're passionate about? Go do some volunteering. That's what I ended up, later on we worked at Lifeline, but I did volunteering with different organizations just to kind of get an idea of what did I like doing. And recognize that, hey, you can always change your mind. I've had 7 different professions, all within that kind of health space. But yeah, don't go into a rush to become something just because your parents want you to. Actually stop and ask yourself, what is it that you want to do? And is it something that you could see yourself doing for a long time? Because mental health and addictions, you could probably spend the rest of your life, in the sector in various ways.
Beautiful, beautiful. Love it. And, I'm glad you brought that up around cultural safety. And, there was research that was done by Dr. Offa Betty Grant, if you know her, where she did some research around Pasifika, literacy numeracy, adult literacy numeracy, went up and down the country, did a research with businesses, employees, and looked at some of the barriers and racism, as people call it. But students or Pasifika tend to feel more safe and learn better when they were being taught by someone who was Pasifika, who looked like them, who sounded like them, who understood them. And I tell people, this is not about racism. It's not about preferring Pasifika because of that. No, it's because they can relate to that person. And because they can relate to that person, they feel a little bit more comfortable and they feel a little bit more safer. So coming back to Dr. Stevens, we need, and Bruce, we need more Pasifika and Māori in healthcare. It's not about ticking boxes. It's not about making sure there's a perfect percentage of representation on the board. It's because our people need you. It builds cultural safety, relatability, all of that stuff. Okay, so the more, the better. Look, and I think one of the biggest things here I wanted to highlight, both of you mentioned, was around this idea of mentoring and rangatiratanga, just like raising the next generation of leaders. Like, it's our responsibility to help look for the next leader. Don't wait for the rangatahi or the youth to come to us. We should be going to them. And how can we coach, mentor, and identify potential and help them reach it? Like, that's part of leadership, especially from Māori and Pasifika point of view. We're looking to our community. Who's the next people I can pass the baton on? Don't let the music die with you, eh? So I really love that. Look, this is my final question to wrap things up here. We've had a really good conversation today with Bruce, Dr. Stevens, just around leadership and bringing your values to the table. What's your biggest message from anything that we've shared today? What's something that you want to leave with our audience? The biggest takeaway. We'll start with you, Bruce.
In times where we are flooded with so much demands in our life, and not just here, but also globally, and it's good just to step away from it. The wars, the situation in Palestine and Algeria, and all those things that kind of come into our fold, into our platforms and social media, and for us to make sense of it. And we're in peaceful little Aotearoa, it's a blessing to be here. So one thing, it's a blessing to be alive in New Zealand. That's one thing. We're here, and we're in this beautiful land of the long-whited cloud. And so don't take for what we have here. We're a peaceful country in comparison. Yet we're not perfect. There's stuff to be done in regards to equity and racism, but in comparison. And so I'm not dismissing the misgivings or the social injustices. But when we look across the place, we just give thanks that we are here. That's the one big thing, I think. And I think this helps ground us, because at the end of leadership, you will retire. What have you got left behind? You still living. If I don't migrate to Australia, I've still got a beautiful place to retire in and to see our moko, Lord willing, and Lord willing, die in this place. Some people, my parents want to be buried in Samoa. But those sort of things for me are the kind of big takeaway. Despite all this amazing work that we do and this awesome privilege of serving our people, take stock of the blessing of being here in this place. Why are we here? Yeah, and so Bussy, that's kind of my big takeaway from here. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that kind of cuts. Yeah, that's for me is that in the position I sit here in my little office here, Otahu, the place of Mate Matonga parades outside here. They
Yeah.
constantly put the flag on the colonial figure of the statue. I go, I'm happy. I'm so blessed to be here. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bruce. And over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I'll keep this short and sweet, eh? If these two that went to James Cook and Manirewa High made it to where they are, you can too, people. Aim high, endeavour, go forward, prosper. Ngā mihi nui, it's always a pleasure, gentlemen. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
I love it. Oh, there we go. Dr. Alexander Stevens II and then Pulotu Master Bruce Levi, Māori and Pasifika leaders in healthcare doing some amazing things. Thank you for your leadership and for your leadership advice. Your time and your insights were much better for it.